Oh, how do you do? Nice of you to drop by me humble abode. My name is Matt, Animat Esquire, one of the northern historians. Historians of animation, that is. You know, recently, I sat down and thought about where else I can explore into the field of animation. I've already tapped upon movies and TV shows in the past, but what about that classic form of animation? Cartoons. You know, shorts that are only meant to make you laugh. Now, yeah, sure, Disney has already mastered their market of cartoons, bringing you stars like Mickey Mouse and technical innovations like the Silly Symphonies. But we all know that the real king of cartoons reside on Warner Brothers, where they brought us their version of Mickey Mouse and Silly Symphonies with Merry Melodies and Looney Tunes. What started all these tunes? When was the very first Looney Tunes cartoon? Well, in order to answer that question, we'd have to swing back in time a little bitty bit. Back during the 1920s to be precise, with two young animators named Hugh Harman and Rudolph Ising. In the beginning of their animation careers, they were working for Walt Disney back in Kansas City with the Laugh-O-Gram shorts, and the two would move to California with Disney to work on his first Hollywood projects, like the Alice's Comedies and Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. However, in early 1928, Charles Mintz fired Disney from Oswald and took some of his animators, including Harman, Ising, and another one called Friz Freleng, until 1929 when Walter Lantz took over Oswald. This actually gave the two a perfect opportunity to have their own studio and started off with their own cartoon character they created and copyrighted back in 1928, which is a black boy named Bosko. His pilot cartoon, Bosko the Talk Inc. Kid, came out a year later to present Harman and Ising's unique style of making cartoons while presenting it in a similar fashion to Max Fleischer's Out of the Inkwell cartoons. What stands out from this cartoon is the innovative use of audio. Where Steamboat Willie puts more emphasis in music, this one focuses a lot more on the dialogue.
Well, here I is, and I sure feel good. Oh, you feel good, do you? Yeah, I was just out of the pen.
This impressed and caught the attention of producer Leon Schlesinger, who signed on the duo at Warner Brothers to create two animated series that would compete against Disney's Mickey Mouse and Silly Symphonies. There's Looney Tunes starring Bosko, with the first cartoon being Sinkin' in the Bathtub in 1930, and Merry Melodies, with its first being Lady Play Your Mandolin, which the latter was made more to promote the songs from Warner Brothers films, acting like music videos.
Lady, when you play for me, night turns into day for me. And the angels pray for me, I belong to you.
But then in 1933, due to both animators and the producer having a dispute over the budget, Harman and Ising quit the studio and took Bosko with them, since they owned the rights to him. This would leave Schlesinger with very little material to make his cartoons. All he has left were just the Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies name, and the only one director who was with Harman and Ising from Disney to Schlesinger, Friz Freleng. So, as a backup plan, the producer went to hire a few more additional animators, including Bob McKimson and Chuck Jones, and put them to work on their next attempt of a Looney Tunes star, Buddy.
Yoo-hoo, Buddy! I'm ready! I'll be right over, Cookie!
Yeah, as you can tell, this was during that awkward period where they were in the category of Disney wannabes. But then came 1935. A crucial year where two events would change Looney Tunes forever. First was the release of the Merry Melodies tune, I Haven't Got a Hat, which introduced the world to their first big star, Porky Pig.
Listen, my children, and you shall hear the midnight ride.
Okay, don't hurt yourself.
The second was when Schlesinger wanted to hire new directors, and one had to lie his way into getting the job, named Tex Avery, the man whose innovative comedy would set a brand new standard to cartoons. As for a new lot to make the tunes, Leon separated the series in two different places.
For Merry Melodies, they were made in a nice-looking building, while the boys like Avery, Jones, McKimson, and more were making the Looney Tunes in an old shack that they named Termite Terrace. The best way to describe the place is that it was garnish, ugly, and D-Relics have used it for a toilet. The building is dilapidated to the point of being lethal and could maim or kill innocent animators. And yet they were just crazy for it. The reason why they love there despite being a crummy shack is because of their producer Leon Schlesinger. You see, Leon is purely a businessman. He doesn't care or want to be involved with the making of these cartoons. For him, as long as they're funny, don't go over budget, and can make a profit, he's perfectly fine with it, thus giving all the creative control purely to the animators. Now, going back to the Looney Tunes, after Porky Pig made himself a prominent cartoon star, there would be more characters that would follow his success, including Daffy Duck in 1937, Elmer Fudd in 1940, and shortly in that same year, the one and only Bugs Bunny. When 1937's Picador Porky came along, Porky's drunk friend was the first voice in a Looney Tunes cartoon to be given by the one and only Mel Blanc.
La cucaracha, la cucaracha, play it on the old guitar. La cucaracha, play it, please, sure.
Soon afterwards, he would become a favorite among the animators at Termite Terrace, and would eventually become the voice of about 99.9% of all the characters in the Looney Tunes. However, in 1941, things started to become a bit sour at the studio. More and more, Tex Avery and Schlesinger were starting to disagree on some gags. But then when the pressure was at its max, Avery quit the Looney Tunes, making Heckling Hare and All That and Rabbit Stew as his last works with Warner Brothers. Other big animators that left after Avery include Frank Tashlin and Bob Clampett. A year later,
Holy cats, I've been drafted!
like most animation studios at the time, they had to make cartoons related to the war and promotional advertisements for the US Air Force during World War II, including tunes that star Private Snafu made by Theodor Geisel, later known as Dr. Seuss. But then, in 1944, Schlesinger would make a big move that would enter the Looney Tunes into a new era. He just sold the whole series to Warner Brothers. Why? Well, remember that thing I said about the guy being more of a businessman? Yeah, that's the downside of him being a producer. He didn't care about the cartoons to the point that he had no trouble selling them off. But is this bad news for the Looney Tunes and the boys making them? You kidding? Things never got better now that Schlesinger is out. By the time World War II was over, they were now working under the eyes of Edward Seltzer, who was apparently quoted to be a grumpy old man who doesn't like cartoons. And yet he's the man in charge of them? But even at that, with the Looney Tunes under new management, now with the tunes being made by Friz Freleng, Bob McKimson, and Chuck Jones with their own storymen like Warren Foster, Ted Pierce, and Mike Maltese respectively, things couldn't get better. As the cast of characters began to grow with Yosemite Sam, Foghorn Leghorn, Wall-E Coyote and Roadrunner, the Tasmanian Devil, and many more, they were also starting to get Oscars for Best Animated Short with a total of 5, starting with the first Sylvester and Tweety cartoon in 1947, Tweety Pie. And this is without mentioning the additional 21 nominations it received. In fact, as time moved on, the differences between Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies became smaller and smaller, where most characters that began in the latter would eventually be a part of the Looney Tunes. In 1955, the crew celebrated their last day at Termite Terrace as they finally got a brand new looking lot in Burbank made especially for them. However, during the 1950s, things started to get a little bit complicated for making these cartoons. Big obstacles like theaters no longer forced to buy shorts with movies as packages, and the creation of television made the budget a lot more tighter than what they're used to. In fact, there was even a short period where Warner Brothers closed off their animation facility to try out 3D films, which is why you would find that weird moment when Chuck Jones did some animation at Disney for Sleeping Beauty. By 1958, Edward Seltzer passed the torch to John Burton to be in charge of the Warner Brothers cartoons, and he decided to bring the Looney Tunes cartoons from 1948 onward onto television in 1960 with The Bugs Bunny Show. 2 years later, that's when things really fell apart. Jones was fired for breaking his contract by writing and producing the UPA film Gay Paris, and Freeling quit shortly afterwards to work on Hey There, It's Yogi Bear. As for the WB's remaining animation head, McKimson, he worked as the animation director for The Incredible Mr. Limpet in 1964, which was the final project before they decided to close down their animation facility. However, even with their golden age gone, that doesn't mean that the Looney Tunes were down and out. Freeling, along with David H. DePatie, formed a new studio called DePatie Freeling Enterprises, and they were the new guys in charge of making the cartoons, which were mostly directed by Frizz and Bob McKimson. They even made more Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner tunes, this time made by Rudy Lariva. But the catch was that they didn't have that comedic finesse Jones had back in the day. However, Warner Brothers decided to take another shot at the Looney Tunes and formed Warner Brothers 7 Arts Animation, with new tunes made by former Walter Lantz and Hanna-Barbera animator Alex Lovey, and they were considered some of the worst cartoons from Warner Brothers. Nice work, Alex! Way to leave your mark in history. A year later, Lovey went back to Hanna-Barbera, and it was up to McKimson to pick up the slack until 1969, when Warner Brothers ultimately decided they will no longer be making shorts and sold Warner Brothers 7 Arts to the Kinney National Company, making a grand total of cartoons made at the WB to be over 1,000. At this point, there was only one source that the Looney Tunes and their cartoons would be able to stay alive. Remember back in 1960 when they made The Bugs Bunny Show? Well, even if the title was often changed to either The Bugs Bunny Roadrunner Hour or The Bugs Bunny and Tweety Show, the series had a serious long run, presenting the legendary cartoons to generation after generation all the way up to 2000. Thanks to the show, it kept the spirit of the tunes alive, and in 1979, Chuck Jones would help Warner Brothers make a compilation film that would present the best of Jones' work with Looney Tunes with the Bugs Bunny Roadrunner movie. When the film was released, it became a massive success, and it would lead the Looney Tunes to a career in feature films, but this time led by Friz Freleng, including the 1981 Looney Bugs Bunny movie, the 1982 Bugs Bunny's third movie, 1001 Rabbit Tales, the 1983 Daffy Duck's movie, Fantastic Island, and the 1988 Daffy Duck's Quackbusters, which the latter was directed by Greg Ford and Terry Lennon. But during that same year as Quackbusters, there was also Who Framed Roger Rabbit, where for the first time ever, the characters would be seen making cameos alongside with their longtime cartoon rivals like Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck.
Ah, no!
Yeah, ain't I a stinker?
Once the 90s came along, the tunes settled back to television with some new shows, including Tasmania in 1991 and the Sylvester and Tweety Mysteries in 1995. On top of that, they even made cameo appearances in other WB animated series, including Animaniacs, Hysteria, and Tiny Toons Adventures, where they were teachers to a new and younger generation of themselves. But their ventures in theaters was far from over. New animated shorts were made in front of Warner Brothers movies like The Neverending Story 2, The Next Chapter, Richie Rich, The Amazing Panda Adventure, Carpool, and Cats Don't Dance emerged that were directed by Darrell Van Siders and Chuck Jones. But it wouldn't be until 1996 when the Looney Tunes would finally have their first legitimate movie with Space Jam, where instead of showing old cartoons that people might have already seen, they would team up with a live-action Michael Jordan to stop aliens by playing basketball. Ah yes, one of the true mysteries that will never be solved. If a tree falls in the forest and no one is there, does it make a sound? Is there life after death? How the fridge did we suddenly connect basketball, aliens, and Looney Tunes? Even by cartoon standards, something doesn't seem to make sense here. But anyways, while critics were rather mixed by such a crazy concept, it ended up becoming a big hit at the box office, making $230 million. Between the 90s and early 2000s, the Library of Congress inducted some of Warner Brothers cartoons into the National Film Registry, including Porky and Wacky Land, Duck Amuck, One Froggy Evening, and What's Opera Doc. As the 2000s rolled along, things were cooling down in terms of their popularity. More TV shows were made that were bringing the tunes into different directions on Kids WB and Cartoon Network, like Being Babies and Baby Looney Tunes in 2002, have it based on only one of their cartoons with Duck Dodgers in 2003, and put in an action sci-fi twist to the tunes with Lunatics Unleashed in 2005. But back in 2003, Warner Brothers made another live-action animated mix with Looney Tunes Back in Action, which ended up quite the opposite of Space Jam. Where critics enjoyed Back in Action a bit more than Jam, at the box office though... Duck. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that for now. It wouldn't be until the 2010s rolled along when new breath came into the characters as the cartoons were brought back to life in computer animation in front of films like Cats and Dogs, Revenge of Kitty Galore, Legend of the Guardians, Owls of Ga'Hoole, the 2010 Yogi Bear, Happy Feet 2, and Journey to the Mysterious Island, all of which directed by Matthew O. Callahan. Around the same time, a new animated sitcom came in called The Looney Tunes Show, which audiences were completely split, either by praising the voice acting and the new portrayal of the characters, or blasted by the poor use of its comedy. The show only ran for 2 seasons with a direct-to-DVD movie, Looney Tunes Rabbit's Run, and was replaced with Wabbit in 2015.
So you see, that is the story of the Looney Tunes, and no matter what shape or form they take on today, they would only prove that they are just so timeless. And yet, I guess we always go back to the classic cartoons, the ones that we fell in love with from the very beginning, and we pass on from generation to generation to present the perfect use of animated comedy. Who couldn't forget the works of legendary pioneers of animation like Tex Avery, Friz Freleng, Bob Clampett, Chuck Jones, Frank Tashlin, and Bob McKimson, the ones who directed most of the pictures. This also includes storymen like Ted Pierce, Warren Foster, and Mike Maltese, whose words would turn into actions that can make us laugh. And of course, you have the unforgettable voice artists like Arthur Q. Bryan, B. Benaderet, Stan Freberg, Doss Butler, June Foray, and the man of 1,000 voices himself, Mel Blanc. Although our little tour of the Looney Tunes seems to be done for now, there is actually a lot more to tell. Each of the characters presented here tell their own unique story about how they helped contributed to the fame of the Looney Tunes. I'm sure that you would be interested in hearing the biography of at least one of them. Let me know when you pick one. I'll be waiting.